space is loud in ways most people never imagine. Every warship, no matter how advanced, leaves behind a trail of heat, radiation, and engine noise that experienced sensor crews can track from millions of kilometers away. For 300 years, the Drathri Empire had built its entire military doctrine around this simple truth. Nothing hides in space. Nothing moves without being seen. That doctrine had made them the most feared power in their quadrant of the galaxy, and it was about to fail them in a way none of their war colleges had ever prepared them for. Fleet Marshal Kessin Vorith stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devastation's Wrath, watching a swarm of sensor contacts representing Earth's outer colony fleet scatter in what looked like desperate, disorganized panic. "They're running," his tactical officer reported, unable to hide the satisfaction in his voice. "Colony defense grid is falling apart. Their remaining ships don't even have coordinated formations anymore." Kessin allowed himself a small, confident smile. Humanity's colonies had resisted Drathri expansion for nearly a year, longer than any other species his empire had encountered, but every resistance eventually broke. Today, it seemed, was the day this one finally did. What Kessin did not know, what his sensor officers could not detect no matter how carefully they scanned the battlefield, was that the chaos unfolding before him had been carefully, deliberately constructed. Earth's colonial fleet was not panicking. It was performing, drawing the Drathri Armada deeper into a trap built around a single, terrifying piece of technology that humanity had spent a decade perfecting in complete secrecy. Somewhere in the darkness beyond Kessin's sensor range, closer than his instruments could possibly register, a ship called the Silent Hunter drifted through the battlefield completely undetected. The Silent Hunter had been born from humanity's oldest lesson about warfare, one learned across centuries of conflict on Earth long before humans ever left their home planet. The side that sees without being seen almost always wins. Human engineers had spent 10 years developing a hull material that absorbed rather than reflected energy signatures, engines that ran cold enough to disappear entirely from thermal scanning, and a propulsion system quiet enough that even the ship's own crew sometimes forgot they were moving at all. It was not a weapon built to overpower an enemy fleet through brute force. It was built to disappear completely, until the exact moment disappearing no longer served any purpose. Captain Elena Vasquez stood in the Silent Hunter's dim command chamber, watching the Drathri fleet's confident advance through a tactical display that showed everything her enemy could not see. "They still don't know we're here," her weapons officer whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow give away their position despite the ship's near-total invisibility. Elena nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the Drathri flagship at the center of the enemy formation. "That's exactly how we need it to stay," she said quietly. "A little longer. Let them believe they're winning." Aboard the colony defense fleet, playing their part in the deception with careful precision, Commander James Whitfield watched his ships scatter in patterns designed to look like desperation while actually herding the Drathri Armada into precisely the formation Elena needed. "Colony grid reporting critical failure across sectors 4 through 7, he transmitted, his voice carrying just the right note of controlled panic for anyone listening. In reality, those sectors had been evacuated days earlier, their defense grids deliberately weakened to sell exactly the story Kessin Vorith wanted to believe. Kessin watched the human fleet's continued collapse with growing anticipation, already composing the message he intended to send announcing this colony's surrender. "Move the main formation into direct assault range," he ordered. "Let's finish this before their colonial government has time to send reinforcements." His fleet advanced further into the trap, 60 warships converging into a tight, confident formation that placed every vessel exactly where Elena Vasquez needed them to be. On the Silent Hunter's bridge, her tactical officer's voice carried quiet urgency. "Captain, they're in optimal strike position. If we're going to move, now is the moment." Elena studied the formation one final time, thinking of every colonist who had spent the last year living in fear of exactly this armada, every family who had watched Drathri conquest spread across neighboring systems with no way to stop it. "Bring weapons online," she said finally. Quietly. "Let's make sure the first thing they know about us is the last thing they ever learn." The Silent Hunter's systems shifted from passive stealth to active combat readiness, a transition so precisely engineered that even the ship's own power signature remained completely undetectable to Drathri sensors watching from mere kilometers away. The first strike came without warning, without any detectable buildup, a coordinated barrage tearing through 3 Drathri escort vessels before their crews even registered they were under attack. Kessin's bridge erupted into confused chaos as alarms blared across every station. "Report. Identify the attacking vessel immediately." His sensor officer's voice cracked with disbelief. "Sir, we have no target lock. No thermal signature. No engine trace. Whatever's firing on us isn't showing up on any scan we have. Kessin stared at his tactical display in growing horror as more of his ships began falling to an enemy his most advanced sensors could not detect. This is impossible, he said, his earlier confidence collapsing into genuine fear. Nothing moves through space without leaving a trace. Nothing. A calm voice cut through his confusion, transmitted from a source his system still could not locate. You're right, Fleet Marshal, Elena Vasquez said, her voice carrying the weight of a decade spent perfecting exactly this moment. Nothing moves without leaving a trace, according to everything your empire understands about physics. We spent 10 years making sure we became the exception to that rule. Kessin's tactical officers scrambled desperately to locate the source of the attack, running every scanning protocol their training had ever taught them, finding nothing but empty space where an entire warship somehow continued operating undetected. The Silent Hunter moved through the Drathari formation like a ghost given purpose, striking precisely engineered blows against command vessels and weapons platforms while remaining completely invisible to every countermeasure Kessin's fleet attempted to deploy. Panic spread rapidly through the armada as ship after ship fell to an enemy that could not be targeted, could not be predicted, and seemingly could not be stopped through any conventional means of warfare the Drathari Empire had ever developed. Regroup the fleet, Kessin shouted, his composure finally breaking entirely. Concentrate defensive fire across all possible vectors. Something has to work. But nothing did. Elena guided the Silent Hunter through the chaos with practiced precision, her crew executing strikes with the confidence of people who had spent years training for exactly this scenario, understanding every weakness in Drathari defensive doctrine because that doctrine had never once accounted for an enemy capable of true invisibility. James Whitfield, watching the battle unfold from his colonial defense fleet, felt something close to awe settle over him despite months of knowing exactly what the Silent Hunter was capable of. They don't even know what's killing them, he said quietly to his crew. A fleet that's conquered a dozen systems, and they can't even see the ship that's ending their campaign. Kessin Vorith, watching his once unstoppable armada collapse into chaotic retreat, finally understood the terrible miscalculation his entire strategy had been built upon. Humanity's colonies had never truly been weak, never truly been close to surrender. They had been buying time, sacrificing the appearance of desperation to lure his fleet into a trap built around a single ship capable of rendering 3 centuries of Drathari military doctrine completely obsolete. Fleet Marshal, his first officer said, voice trembling, we've lost over half our remaining ships. If we continue engaging an enemy we cannot even detect, we risk losing everything. Kessin stared at the wreckage scattered across his tactical display, understanding finally that his empire's confidence, built on centuries of successful conquest through overwhelming visible force, had left them completely unprepared for an enemy that had simply decided not to be seen at all. Order full retreat, he finally said, his voice hollow with the weight of humiliation neither he nor his empire would soon forget. All remaining ships withdraw from the system immediately. As the shattered remains of the Drathari Armada fled back toward the edge of colonial space, the Silent Hunter remained perfectly hidden, watching the retreat unfold without ever revealing its true position, its true capabilities, or the exhausted crew who had just ended a war through patience rather than force. Elena allowed herself a quiet breath of relief, watching a decade of secretive preparation validate every sacrifice it had demanded from the engineers and crew who had built this impossible ship. Captain, her tactical officer said softly, disbelief still evident in his voice, we did it. They never even knew we were there. Elena nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the retreating Drathari fleet fading into the dark beyond the colony's outer sensors. That was always the plan, she said quietly. Humanity doesn't need to be the loudest fleet in this galaxy. We only need to be the one they never see coming. News of the Drathari Empire's catastrophic and inexplicable defeat spread across the region within days, reshaping how neighboring civilizations viewed a species whose colonies they had assumed were close to collapse. Kessin Vorith, forced into humiliating retreat by an enemy his sensors had never once detected, would spend the remainder of his career warning Drathari Command that humanity's silence, their apparent weakness, could no longer be trusted as an accurate measure of their true strength. Deep within the Silent Hunter, still drifting invisibly through the system it had just saved, Elena Vasquez watched her crew begin the quiet work of returning to full stealth, understanding better than anyone that the greatest weapon humanity had ever built was never really about power. It was about patience and the willingness to stay hidden exactly long enough for that patience to matter most.